is where we are in terms of numbers. We seem to have a lot of them. The number this is, but we're well down the track. So welcome. These series of seminars are of course run by the Employer Engagement Task Force in collaboration with the Centre for Education and Industry at the University of Warwick. And I'm delighted to see so many people here. It's a really good turnout for what promises to be something very interesting and stimulating. This afternoon we have about 1 hour-ish, and we are going to hear from Anthony. I think it's not very much introduction, but in case he does, for those who don't yet know Anthony, Dr. Anthony Mann, who is the Director of Policy Research here at the Educated Employers Task Force, and he's going to be ably supported by Christian, who's doing a great deal of work on this paper. It's a joint piece of work, who was formerly Director of Operations here at the EETF. He's now working for the strategy consulting firm Roland Berger. And they have asked that you don't interrupt in the initial stages, so we'll have no heckling or shouting or waving sweaty nightcaps. So we're going to ask them to speak for about 25 minutes, after which there'll be plenty of time to have questions. And if you can then, when we have questions, say who you are and where you come from in the time-honoured manner, and direct those to the chair. So welcome to Anthony or Christian return, and we're very interested to hear all about your research. So over to you.
Thank you very much, Prue. I'm going to sort of jump straight into things, and this is what we're talking about this afternoon. What we're interested in is school-to-work transitions in the 21st century. That's our subject of our research, and it's pretty widely agreed, if you look at the literature, that school-to-work transitions, being from when you leave your full-time education through to the period where you begin sustained employment in a job, are becoming of longer duration, more fractured, complex, and it's quite good literature to say that they're critically socially determined as well, that particularly young people from disadvantaged backgrounds are finding it harder and harder to make that move easily. It's pretty widely acknowledged as a problem, and policymakers and analysts have seen this area, which is what we're going to be talking about, of school-mediated workplace exposure, as a means which can enhance school-to-work transitions, make it easier for the broad range of people. There's a quote here from the OECD, it's Learning for Jobs report in 2010, highlighting issues, increased complexity of choices, the difficulty of finding a place in the fragmenting labour market of where to go, but also a sense that good information, good advice is important to young people, and there's a role for working with local employers to help signal relevant information to young people. And in the UK, from 2004, in England, Scotland and Wales, we had legislation or acts by some ministries of education to encourage and enable or require schools to offer work-related learning with employees engaged in education processes linked to learning progression. Multiple objectives, as many people will know, but within them all, there's an assumption that the more of this you can have, the better the job prospects that people ultimately have. So as the DCSF said in 2008, part of the idea behind work-related learning and employer exposure was to make people more attractive to future employers. So that's a bit of a theory which has been going around for some time. The literature on this is kind of weak, really, much weaker than it ought to be. A couple of interesting things have come out here on the right. People might be aware of the 2008 literature review, which the then DCSF commissioned, which looked at a wide range of publications, and lots of positive impacts and evidence, reliable evidence of impacts going into the labour market. It's based on attainment, but it also covered that area. And probably the single best, most interesting study which is available here is, again, sort of 2008 study of the US Career Academies program, where we had a large group randomly assigned into a control group and a group which had the intervention on their career academies, which is kind of a vocationally focused but academic learning program. with the extent of employer engagement. And we know at the end of that, 8 years after leaving high school, even though attainment levels are very similar between the two groups, our career academies veterans, I knew I shouldn't touch the board. All right, I won't do it. Well, maybe I will start doing it because that's kind of nice, isn't it? To do that. Or only 11% more. Yeah, so there's some compelling, interesting, suggested evidence of positive impacts. So what we wanted to do here was see, can we look into this question ourselves and test the relationship between the extent of employer engagement arranged during the school year between 14 and 19 and successful labour market progression of young adults. And so we're looking particularly for evidence in two areas. One is wage premiums, thinking back to that career academies program in the US, but also NEET status. And we've chosen NEET rather than employment because people are going through transitions during these years. And NEET is a very good indicator, perhaps, that somebody is not productively using their time in order to be able to build human capital and gain experience and progress towards ultimate labour market success. So at this point, I'll hand over to Christian, who's going to talk to you about numbers.
I won't talk to you for too long about numbers because those that have detailed statistical questions are probably best to discuss at the end or even one-on-one. But what I do want to do is sort of describe the headline approach that we took. And we were faced with a situation where the existing research fell into two sort of categories. One was around qualitative, opinion-based or small case study-based evidence, which suggested that, yes, this employer engagement probably does work. And then on the other hand, you've got the in-depth, longitudinal study work from the US that actually it does work and it provides such and such a wage premium. The problem with both of those is that the US one might not apply in a UK context. Careers Academies is a very specific type of program. And with the more qualitative work we have seen in the UK, it's hard to say, well, how important is it? So the quickest way to generate an answer to that, there we go, was to do a survey across 1,000 or so people and ask them two questions. How much are you earning? And how much contact did you have with employers? And doing something like this means you can get a piece of analysis done and get some answers out in the period of, say, a few months or half a year, rather than the several years it might take and the cost it would take to do a longitudinal study or something of that sort. So that's exactly what we did. We asked YouGov, who sits on the research group as well, I think, to help us out with this. They spoke to 1,000 adults between 19 and 24, all across the UK, and asked them a whole series of background questions about gender and ethnicity and what type of school they went to, but also asked them the two killer questions, which were, how much employer contact do you remember while you were at school? And we made this question sort of long and detailed to rule out things like your dad's mate or part-time work. So this is very much school-mediated employer contact. And then we asked, for those of you that are earning, and it's not as many, as you see, it's NA down here, 800 people, or so people between 19 and 24, were not in an annual paid environment. But still enough, as you can see, that we can start to look at the spread. So we did two pieces of analysis on this, and I'll describe them in order. The first is to do with, if we look just at those who were earning a wage, is there any evidence that they were earning more if they'd had more employer contact? And secondly, we looked at the NEET status. So to look at the wage one first, we had to do a little bit of stuff to ensure we were comparing like with like. We couldn't compare someone that was earning to someone that wasn't earning, for instance. So we look only at those that are earning a wage. We exclude those from Northern Ireland because they've got a different relationship between school-mediated employer engagement policy and the labour market, and there is more comparability between England, Scotland and Wales. So we had to lose a few of our respondents there, exclude those who haven't answered some of the questions, obviously, and all of this left us with 176 people, which is pushing the boundaries of sample size for what you can do with this. And that has two implications in a way. For a start, it means the effect we're trying to observe has got to be reasonably big for us to even have a chance of finding it with such a small sample. But it also means, more irritatingly, we can't do much subsample analysis. I can't tell you, is this different in London to the north? Because by the time we look at London as only, I've maybe got 30 or 40, and I've only got 30 or 40 in the north, and I just can't compare those two groups. But we can still control for which area they're in. So there are some, you can compare the two variables just directly and see, oh, is the average wage of someone that had more employer contacts, is that average wage higher than someone that had less? And that's true, and that relationship existed. But what we wanted to do was control for the background variables and make sure this wasn't just all the white kids getting all the high-earning jobs and getting all the employer contacts. Or indeed the other way around, if there was more intervention for non-white groups, for instance. School type's obviously really important. The independent school effect, where your dad gets you all these, or your school invests lots of money in work experience or mentoring schemes with alumni networks. And then also, because of your link to your parents, you're more able to go on and get a good job. But we control for that in as much as we can. This had independent school, grammar school, state special schools in there. And the result of this was that it worked, I suppose. I mean, what this correlation means is something that Anthony will talk about next. But in terms of the statistical link, we did find a statistically significant result at the 5% level. Just, I should say, it wasn't far above the 5% threshold, but it was above it. The analysis passed a series of diagnostic tests, and we get this sort of £300 to £1,000 per year benefit for each employer contact. And I deliberately use a range there. You know, the maths threw up £700, £750, I think. But because these are so highly uncertain effects, I'm much more comfortable reporting a range than I am reporting a single number. You're doing better with this than I was. The other thing also was this. That's the NEET status. One last thing I would say on the regression analysis on the last slide was that we went through a process of reviewing the methodology and assuring this with analysts from the LSN and from the DFE. So we've sought input on this rather than just freewheeling. Okay, well, next on to the NEET one. Thank you. The relationship between employer engagement, number of employer engagement contacts, sort of 0 up to 4 or more, was in a way easier than the annual wage, because everyone, or nearly everyone, is either NEET or not NEET. So we didn't have to reduce the sample size to just those 176. And you can see that the raw correlation, before we include background variables and controls, is pretty compelling. But there are some other problems with the logistical regression approach. We did have to exclude those who didn't say whether they were NEET or non-NEET, who didn't self-declare. And again, similar to the others, we excluded some missing answers. When we did the analysis, everyone that's from a special school came out as an outlier. Perhaps isn't surprising, they have a very different relationship with the labour market and their NEET status. So I excluded those in order to get a more easily comparable group of people. And then on a technical point, you have to group the data in certain ways that we can talk about more later. But we still have, did the person attend an independent school? If not, did they ever attend a grammar school or state selective? State or the other. And we control for, as in the other one, the highest level of qualification that was achieved. Okay. And again from this, we get a similar sort of story. We're just about significant at the 5% level. Employer contacts, as is unsurprising when you saw the graph on the other page, but even when we control for the background variables, we still have a very positive relationship. And specifically, we see that each employer contact improves the odds of being non-NEET by 29%. And just to make that sound a bit more like English, the base person, so someone who had no employer contacts, who was 19 years old, who was white, who I think was female, it depends on how the dummies were set up, their chance of being NEET was, chance of being NEET was 1 to 11, which fits in roughly with what we know, roughly 10 or so % of people being NEET as the base criteria. For every extra chance, for every extra employer contact you get, instead of it being 11 to 1, it's 11 plus 29% to 1. So 14 or so to 1, and then up again to 17 to 1 if you've had 2 bits of employer contact. So your chances of being non-NEET get better and better as you go on. And that may be, yes, over to whether that correlation is believable.
Okay. And if you work through those 29%, and if you start with 0 and then you go through 29% for each one, eventually you get up to the top of our sample, which is 4 activities or more, where you're 5 times less likely to be NEET than if you did nothing, where in school you're controlling for your highest level of attainment. So that's what the statistics are showing us. The next question really is, how can we explain such results? Because they're quite striking, really, I think, to see. The first question I always get asked when I talk about this is that, well, it's, kids are opting into it. What you're finding here is that the kids for activities and more are the ones who show agency. They're the ones who choose to be able to do this. But the way that sort of employer engagement happens in UK schools is that there's actually quite limited capacity for agency within it. In most schools, they do work experience or they don't. You do so like a one-day enterprise competition, which the whole cohort goes to, or you don't. There's a limited aspect. Activities like Young Enterprise or Young Chain, the long duration enterprise activities which tend to be 16 plus, young people opt into on the whole. And one-to-one mentoring, often it's from business mentoring, it's the school which decides. The school is showing agency. And through our sample, we can work out what proportion of young people had either of those 2 interventions, which are the 2 key ones. And if you put them together, it's 21% of our sample. So there's probably something of this about agency, but it doesn't explain the whole of these results which we see. Now, the second thing is that, the second obvious question is, are these young people coming through the education system and developing greater human capital, which would lead us to believe that this might be why they're getting paid more, why they're less likely to be NEET as young adults. Well, part of it, I suppose, that there's a question for ourselves that do we think intuitively that a one-day enterprise competition, careers talks, workplace visits, even 2 weeks work experience can give somebody such a high degree of employability skills that when they actually get into the labour market, it's going to warrant that variation. And I think this is an area where we want better evidence. But if you look at some of the evidence here, this is from Australia. This is taken from Australia. Where we asked young people to compare what they thought about work experience with the part-time job they did. One thing which comes out of this is that, that these young people doing 2 weeks work experience, around about the same age, 15, 16 as in the UK, found it very comparable, which shows that you can gain an awful lot of employability skills through 2 weeks comparable to a part-time job. But we know that like 80% plus of young people do work experience. We know that historically about 75% of late teenagers work part-time working. So can this in itself explain the effects where this is the opportunity for the greatest development of human capital we might see? Well, we think probably not, but this last one here, that if you can read it, is how helpful was it in the career you would like to do after school? And here people did work experience, this is where the big variation is. They commit 3.10 on a scale of 1 to 4 against 2.3 for the part-time job, showing that the school-mediated work experience here is helping them develop their their career decision-making, which then leads us to think about contacts, people you come into contact with, and the ability to influence your decisions about your own career and where you might go and what your aspirations are. And there is a literature around social capital theory, which I think is very relevant here. Those of you who have ever read into social capital theory will know that there are lots of different social capital theories. There's probably about 7 or 8. The one that we're really interested in is the one which American sociologist Mark Granovetter developed in the 1970s, which he called the strength of weak ties. And this strength of weak ties has been used extensively to understand how adults secure opportunities in the adult labour market. Basically, who you know is useful because it gives you access to non-redundant, trusted information. The more people you know a little bit, the more likely it is that you'll be able to pick up information about opportunities and then secure employment. And there's a very good literature around this in the adult labour market, and social capital works very effectively. In terms of young people, though, it's been less used, this aspect of social capital. Carlo Raffo at Manchester University did a series of articles about 10 years ago which explored social capital theory, particularly looking at disadvantaged young people, risk of being NEET, extended work experience placements, and what they got out of it through structured interviews and focus groups and observation he observed the way that we could see that sort of social capital working, that through the work experience, young people have the opportunity to gain information, observe, aid, confirm decisions in what he calls individual and situational environment. It's different from being in the classroom, and it's personal to an individual, and they can gain new information, access to information, to help them make strategic life decisions. As he says, going beyond the structuring influence of locality and class. The idea that through these contacts, you can gain new information which helps you make better decisions about where you want to go and how you might get there. Now, this is an idea which, say, Carlo Raffo has used extensively, I think very persuasively, thinking about disadvantaged young people. Our question really is, does this apply across the board? It's not just the disadvantaged young people who may have relatively weak social capital in terms of their own home networks. Certainly, sort of like the education literature tells us that young people, pupils, are very attentive to external professionals, employee volunteers when they come into a school. They treat them in a different way to the way they treat sort of teaching staff. They hear them differently, which would suggest that it may well be that the social capital is what's at play here. And in our in the YouGov survey, we had opportunity for some people to write in, what if anything did you get out of the employer context you had in school? And we've done an analysis of that, where people talk far more about, well, I gained some new information, I learned something new, rather than I developed lots of skills. And so that's led us to think more closely about social capital. And we could run a test. And in our YouGov survey, we put this question. This is about career talks. So we said, when you're at school, did you ever have access to a career talks from an employee volunteer? And our theory would be is that the more you have of this, the more likely it is that you find use in it. Because it needs to be trusted, and it needs to be additional to the information you already have. So if you're from a family of doctors, and you meet a doctor, well maybe they might tell you a little bit new, but that's kind of duplicating what you've access to already. But if you're from a family of doctors and want to be an engineer but never meet an engineer socially, that's going to be really useful. There's a bit of like throwing mud at a wall. The more you throw, the more value you expect there to come from it. So we asked young people about career talks. Did you have it while you were at school? If you did, once or twice or 3+ times. And then how was it of any use to you in deciding on a career, getting a job after education, getting into higher education? And so this, we don't have more space in the survey to ask these rather simple questions. But the key thing is, this is our total positives. So 69% or 1 to 2 times, people say it was either little or a lot of help in deciding on a career, and 15%, 15% is the subset of the allots. If you go to 3+, that goes up to 26%. And this is what we would expect if we thought social capital was playing out through this. Now, we can look at this from other perspectives as well, because at the background of this is that there is a series of very good recent longitudinal studies which look at the cost of either indecision about careers at 16 or unrealism about it. Yates was a British study, it was a British cohort study, which looked at how we had questions to be able to analyse what happened to young people. 7% of his sample at 16 didn't know what they wanted to do, or the 40% who had career aspirations which were greater than the likely expected highest level of qualification. Meaning at a basic level, there are some people saying I want to be a lawyer, but I'll probably leave education after 8 years. And so a very high proportion, who tend to be from more sort of socially deprived backgrounds, have this sort of misalignment between their expectations and their career aspirations. And this group, what you find is if you follow them through, at 16 to 18, they're 2-3 more times likely to be NEET. From the US, Staff & Co. in Social Forces did a thing based on the 10% of Americans at 16 from their longitudinal study who are uncertain about their career aspirations. And then, as with Yates, put the controls in place, allow highest level qualification. What happens to them 10 years later, age 26? They're working less and they're earning less. And then Schneider as well, which is more qualitative, covers the same ground, reach similar conclusions. So what we're looking at here is, particularly what's really interesting, which might help, go a long way towards explaining the results we see, is the extent to which this employer contact, this employer engagement at school, influences career decision making. And so we can go through various samples. Some of these you'll know very well. Some 2 people in this room are involved in some of them. This one about work experience. And thinking about some of the progression points, the decisions people make about where they want to go and how to get there. So I'm clear about my future education, encouraging, discouraging choosing work like this, making post-year 11 decisions, which is really important in thinking about making that match between your interests, your skills, your abilities, and where you might want to end up in the labour market. And pretty high, very high responses from our young people in those surveys saying that it helped in those terms. Look at it from another perspective. This is from a school in West London, which earlier this month had a career networking event for Year 9 pupils. Career networking is kind of like speed dating with employers. You kind of work your way around the room, 1-to-1 or 1-to-2. You chat to employers. And these are girls' school. These girls saw 7 in the morning, and afterwards they were surveyed about what they felt about this. And we're picking up things in very high levels and strongly agrees about employability skills or employability skills being sought, and accessing careers information, which is important in terms of once you have your aspiration, you need then to be able to think about how to actually find the reliable information from careers professionals who are going to move towards that. This is what I'm really interested in. I feel more confident in approaching options and thinking about the choices which young people make early on to optimise their chances of going into their preferred careers. And so here we've got 79% agreeing that they felt more confident about going into their options for Year 10. Just looking at it from another perspective, some people will know this one. With Deloitte and BeLive, in 2010 we surveyed 333 young people. It's a bit fluffy, this one, as a survey. 71% of 13 to 16. We did some regressions in this to it's not age, which is determining these results. But our young people who had 4 or more employer contacts they remembered are far more confident about making career decisions and far more likely to agree with statements like, I feel I know what I need to do to get the sort of jobs I want. Now, I suppose in some ways these figures are very worrying because they are very low. Even, none of these go above 50%. And that's important because I think our backstory here is growing awareness of the information and gaps which exist for young people in schools between what their aspirations are and what the reality of local labour markets are in turn. And so Sinclair and Co., big report for the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, 770 interviews, focus groups with pupils and also some teachers, 3 schools in 3 British cities between 14 and 19, both at 13 and at 15, so they go back to them some 2 years later. Finding little correspondence between the structure of local labour markets, young people's aspirations, expectations. Emma Norris's piece for the Royal Society of Arts, based on focus groups and FE, finding, again, that aspirations are neither determined by ability nor based on comprehensive understanding of the types of jobs available. And finding us that this disconnect, this information gap which exists, where people generally have very high aspirations, want to do really well, but they're very narrow. So in this way, I think we can see the way that sort of interventions we're talking about are heard very clearly, and then people are able to gain useful information which allows them to show greater agency themselves as they sort of decide what to choose to study, where to choose it, and what experience to get. And I think one of the really striking